It was never going to be easy, but who would have imagined it would turn out to be so hard? In June 2010, Julia Eileen Gillard was sworn in as the 27th Prime Minister of Australia. In a turbulent few years dealing with a hung parliament, a hostile opposition, and at times scathing media, Prime Minister Gillard managed to pass well over 500 pieces of legislation. Today, Julia Gillard sat down to tell me the true story of Australia's first female Prime Minister. Hi Julia, and welcome to the Book Circle.
Thank you very much, and I'm getting to pat a dog, so that's nice too.
So you've got John Brown.
Hello, John Brown.
And I've got George. I want to talk to you about your memoir.
Thank you.
I read it over the weekend and I thought it was candid, it was very well written. It was, in some parts it read raw, and in some parts I was exhausted for you.
Right.
Tell me about
Sorry I've given you a weekend with little bits of exhaustion, but I did try and put it all in there for people to judge and people to experience.
You did, particularly those times where you talked about only getting 2 hours sleep. That must have been a tough life.
There are lots of aspects of the Prime Minister's life that are a tough life. The pressure is relentless, the responsibilities are obviously huge.
Yeah.
In the book I didn't try to focus on that too much, the things that are big but routine for whoever is serving as Prime Minister. I really tried to focus on the things that were different for me.
Yeah.
You know, gender obviously different, minority parliament different,
right.
You know, the internal workings within the Labor Party, the destabilisation different.
Yeah.
And I did all of that because people would always rush up to me as Prime Minister and say, how do you do it, you know, when it's all so hard? And I wanted to try and answer that question.
But one of the things that I wanted to set up today, and I thought that you might appreciate, is that I have this bowl, and it's usually quite decorative. But
You've done the fruit.
I did the fruit because I didn't want you to leave here and just say she doesn't have any fruit in a fruit bowl. I didn't want any criticism about my fruit bowl.
Okay, it probably wouldn't have been me that did the criticism of your fruit bowl, but I know exactly the point you're making.
It was appalling.
Oh, look, it's, I mean, all of that really is, it's an example of, in some ways it's silly, in some ways it's trivial, and in writing it in the book, you know, I've produced the photo, the non-fruit fruit bowl shot.
Absolutely.
But it adds up, and it adds up to a frame and a judgment about women and leadership, which isn't the same as men, and I'm really inviting people to think their way through all of that.
Okay, I want to talk to you about government. Government and media is so intrinsically linked. However, I feel more and more in terms of media that we're becoming more about headlines, we're becoming more about shock jocks.
Yes.
But what I'm finding is happening, particularly with our current government, is that government is becoming more shock jock-like, that we are more about headlines and less about substance.
I think there's a lot of merit in that analysis. Some of it's political style, a lot of it is to do with the current media agenda.
Yeah.
And by that I mean, you know, the things that new technology has brought. Now, it's brought a lot of good things, but I know from talking to, you know, good journalists in the Canberra Press Gallery, and there are some good journalists in the Canberra Press Gallery.
You can name them on one hand.
Well, there are a few, and they will say to you, look, you know, in the old days, going back 10, 15 years, because many of them have been around a long time, you know, I'd have to produce my column and I'd be able to, you know, think about it all day and carefully write my column and my opinion, and it would appear in the newspaper the next day. Today, those very same journalists get an editor barking down the phone at them at 8 a.m. to produce a 800-word comment piece very, very quickly to post up online, then to tweet and to blog and to go on 24-hour TV and then do it all again, as well as file their copy for the next day's papers, and on it goes. And so, being human beings with human capacities, you know, if the government announces a huge, big, complicated policy that will require hours of analysis and work to get your piece together and put it in the paper or online, Or you can, ring someone up for a hard-edged quote about leadership or, an issue of the day. What's easier? You go for the quick headline and the quick quote.
Let's talk about hard work. I noticed that you were very, very hardworking, that you were affecting change, that it was good politics, but it wasn't what I was hearing. People just didn't want to know what the work that was being done. They wanted the headlines. Will we ever get back to a time where it's actually about running the country?
I think that there were some special factors during my time in government that, this charged up media environment that we're talking about got amped up even to a different and higher level. And then there was the politics that came with minority government, which it was always easy for the opposition and others to characterise my motivations as being about my political survival rather than doing things which were good for the country.
Absolutely.
And that created a kind of wall which was hard to get through. And then, the internal destabilisation within my political party, fed any number of media stories and headlines, and so you'd be going out frustratingly on a day with a huge policy announcement, big changes for schools or something we'd really worked very hard on, and the only thing that was in the air was all about leadership.
Now I'm going to touch on the misogyny speech.
Sure.
Because I feel that it's something that can't be ignored. When you finally spoke, and you spoke from your heart, it just absolutely moved me to my core. My greatest disappointment at the time was the reaction of the Australian media. What happened? Why didn't they get it? One
thing I would say for the Canberra Press Gallery is, because they are so focused on the daily parliamentary play, who's up, who's down, who's winning, who's losing, who's the best on field for the day, all of that kind of stuff, that it can be hard for them to assess the broader implications of something beyond that, who won question time today kind of look at it. And I think they genuinely missed it. Now, in some ways, I missed it in the delivery. I didn't get that it was going to reverberate like that. But by the time I'd walked back to my office, it was clear to me that it was, out there and pinging around the world and resonating with women in the way that you describe. For me, that speech, it's in the delivery of it, I thought it had power and projection, because I saw Tony Abbott and all of the opposition kind of drop their heads and drop their heads and drop their heads. So I understood that. Now, I understand the full power of it, because, I still, when I'm walking the streets of whether it's Melbourne or New York or Tokyo or London or Brussels, things that I've done during the course of this year, will have women and sometimes men come up to me and say, great speech, and then they've got a story about, I watched it with my daughter, or I've watched it 100 times, I watch it when things are happening at work that are bad, we watched it all at work and it sparked a good conversation. So yeah, I do, I'm now very proud of the power of it.
And so you should be. And do you know what I also hear from overseas people? Why did you treat your Prime Minister so badly?
I get some of those inquiries too about Australia, and I'm always quick to defend us, because people try and say to me, look, this is about something about Australian society, and I say very quickly, no, this is something about our societies generally, Western societies, and women and leadership that we've all got to resolve. Because some dreadful things happened to Hillary when she was on the campaign trail. And then we've always got to remind ourselves too, whilst we're still fighting for genuine equality, in so many other parts of the world, I mean, women are fighting for the most absolutely basic rights to not be forced to marry young, to control their own bodies and fertility, to go to school is a dangerous thing. So we can help women around the world. I'm seeking to do that now through a focus on girls' education, even as we keep changing our own societies.
Now, I'm not going to keep going on about this, but I did notice in an interview that you did recently to promote this memoir, one of the presenter asked you about the photograph of you on the front of the book, and I got to tell you, I had to get up and turn it off.
Right.
Because I thought, did we ask John Howard what he thought of his photograph on the front of the book. Do we ask men what they think of the photograph of them, you know, on any photograph, and how they feel about being dressed in the morning and how they look?
It actually becomes a judgment, you know. Somehow women are to be judged by their appearance rather than what they do, whereas we're much more given to judging men by what they do. Now, that's not hard black and white, there are shades of grey in that, but we do need to get through the appearance judgments that we make about women.
Do. Yeah, absolutely do. Now tell me, what do you think was one of your greatest achievements? If you can pick one thing that you're most proud of as Prime Minister, what would that be?
Oh, I'm obviously very proud of all the work we did in education and the change to the school funding system, national curriculum, better teaching, and so the list goes on. And you asked me before, I mean, what stays, what endures? The school funding changes, the current government said in the election campaign they'd keep them and then resiled from that in government. But the bit that's in contest is the bit in the future, and so I think it'll be a big issue in the 2016 election campaign. But what I can certainly guarantee is we are never going back to the unfair funding system of the past. I've pushed the nation, the government pushed the nation past that to a new and better way of supporting our kids' education, so I'm very proud of that.
Regret? Do you have any?
Oh, look, I do, and I speak very frankly about them in the book. I think I made some, you know, bad political errors, certainly the selling of carbon pricing, not contesting the label carbon tax was a very, very bad one, and it made it more difficult to persuade the Australian community about acting on climate change, and obviously cast me as someone who wasn't honest with the electorate. So I regret that. I regret not, you know, carving out more time for consultation with colleagues and with people with ideas beyond the political class. I used to do a lot to carve out thinking time, but looking back on it, I wish I'd done even more.
You know, Barack Obama's coming towards the end of his term. I mean, what advice would you give to Barack, for instance, in terms of walking away from a position of great leadership?
I'm sure President Obama doesn't really need my advice, but if I was offering it, think really about, you know, the bit you want to take with you most and invest in for the future. I mean, I think as a former Prime Minister coming out at the age that I am, that's been incredibly important to me to, you know, pick the thing that I really want to invest these years of my life in.
I think he would turn to you for advice. He was a big fan and held a high regard for you in office, so I think that he would take your advice. Well, congratulations on a fantastic memoir.
Thank you.
It's been a privilege having you here today, and it's just been wonderful chatting with you, and thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.